Welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. If you struggle with food and weight like I did, welcome home.
Welcome everybody to the Heal Your Hunger Show. So happy to have you here. It is a great day to be alive and I'm feeling better by the day. So thank goodness for that. I'm a little tired. I've had COVID, so it's kind of knocked me on my butt a little bit, to say the least, but I am on the mend and I'm grateful for that. And so much so that I have the energy to interview some incredible doctors today to talk about COVID and what you can do to make sure you don't get it, or to heal if you have. You know, we want to make sure we heal and continue healing. For those of you who have never been at the Heal Your Hunger show, guess what? You're in for a treat. This is where we go deeper than just food and weight, because as an emotional eater, I was 50 pounds overweight, but addressing my problem at the symptom level of food and weight was not enough for me. So if you have been beating your head against the wall time and time again because you can't lose the weight and keep it off, or you've lost it and you've put it back on, it might be because you're an emotional eater, okay? And that's good news, because there's a solution for emotional eating. And that's what I do with Heal Your Hunger. That's what the Heal Your Hunger system is about. And I have clients all around the globe who are finally gaining a really healthy relationship with food and losing weight in the process, on account of addressing emotional eating and the underlying causes. So you're in the right place if you're ready to have a deeper conversation around how to heal from your struggles with food and weight. If you're not sure if you're an emotional eater, join us. Go to healyourhunger.com. Join us for the quiz. Okay, I say join us. I didn't really mean that. I meant take the quiz. Take the emotional eating quiz. Find out if you're an emotional eater or a food addict or somewhere in between. You're going to get a personalized score. So if you sort of feel like this idea of emotional eating is weird and might not be a fit for you, take the quiz and you'll know right away. You'll get a personalized score. And also, we are recording today's show in the Secret Sauce group. So the Secret Sauce to End Emotional Eating. So join us in the Secret Sauce on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and type in the Secret Sauce to End Emotional Eating, and you can be a part of the conversation also. I have some amazing guests today that I'm really, really excited to introduce to you. They've been with me before, I think right after the outbreak of COVID in March. And so we're back again, and we're going to be talking about all things COVID. Why? Well, because it hasn't gone anywhere, has it? And I personally have just gotten COVID. So I still probably have it. I think I'm on day 9 of symptoms, but I am getting better, thank God. And it is not fun. So it hasn't gone anywhere, and we need to talk about it. I want everybody to be safe and to avoid it and not be cavalier, because you just don't know how bad it is until you get it, you know, and then you're like, oh, now I know what all the fuss is about. So guess what? This is the time to get serious and get your questions answered, you know, talk about some of the things that have happened, on account of COVID, and sort of where we're at now with all the news around it. So, I want to introduce to you, my 2 amazing friends. And they are, in their own right, amazing people, good souls. But beyond that, they're brilliant doctors, and they have a lot of experience with treating patients with COVID, with getting COVID themselves. This is especially why I wanted them to have on. It's like the COVID club today. So I wanted to make sure we got to talk about it today. So welcome Dr. Tom Moorcroft and Dr. Elisa Song. So glad you guys are here. Let me just talk about you two. Well, you can say hi and then I'll talk about you.
Hi. Hey.
So Dr. Elisa Song is known as the holistic mama doc, and she is a holistic doctor, but she's traditionally trained, and she is a holistic pediatrician and has a huge following of mamas who want to really treat their kids with the best possible medicine and natural solutions for their health. So, I mean, I could go into so many things about her background because she's brilliant. But that's all I'm going to say, and you'll know more in a minute. And Dr. Tom Moorcroft is an amazing doctor out of Connecticut, and Dr. Lisa Song is San Francisco, and Dr. Moorcroft is the founder with his wife of Origins of Health Medicine in Connecticut, and he has specialized in treating very difficult to treat cases of Lyme and other amazingly tough cases of all kinds of things. I'll let him tell you about it, but that's especially why I like having him here to talk about COVID. So welcome, you guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us. We're super glad to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's I wanted you on here because you actually we've all had COVID, and I'm getting over it. And with your guys' help, thank you both for chiming in about what I can do and what I can do to take the best supplements. I gave Elisa a snapshot of all the things that I ordered, and she told me exactly kind of how to take them. So that was super cool. And Dr. Tom was talking to me yesterday about my boyfriend who is dog sick, absolutely dog sick with COVID. I do feel very blessed that I didn't get it, in the way that, he's gotten it, but definitely it can really, it kills people, right? So, my boyfriend keeps saying, I can't believe I've never been this sick. I can't believe I'm so tired. I'm like, dude, people are dying. Like, this is for real. This is a tough, this is a terrible, terrible condition, so thank God you're not dying from it. But of course it's going to take a bite out of you. It has taken a bite out of so many people. So will you guys talk about, first of all, let's talk about getting it and what it was like for each of you when you had it. Well, Lisa, you can start.
Sure. Yeah. Like, whoa.
Sorry.
Who goes first?
So my story is really, it's an interesting one in the sense that it turns out in retrospect that all four of us, my husband, me, my daughter, and my son, had COVID. And this was in the very, very early days. So this was beginning of March when we really, there was a lot of hysteria and panic. And if you guys, it's what now, almost 12 months into the pandemic, right? It was just described, the SARS-CoV-2 virus was described on December 30th out of Wuhan, China. And it seems like a lifetime ago, because back then, the fear and the panic that was gripping us as a country, as a world, it was palpable, right? We just were living in this collective like fight or flight state, and it was awful, right? We're not in that place anymore because we know so much more. The survival rates are so much better, right? People are still getting hospitalized, getting very sick, but they're coming out of it. And we know what the risk factors are. It's obesity, some lifestyle related diseases, age, right? And so, and we know that kids are for the most part doing much better than adults, right? But back then we didn't know that at all. And so, when we got sick, first of all, my husband and I, we never really got sick, right? And so the first thing I knew was that on March 13th, it was Friday the 13th, right? Schools went into lockdown, right? This was like, we were told, okay, schools are closing. We'll come back in a couple of weeks after spring break, right? This was everyone's thought. Okay, 2 weeks, we're gonna lock it down. We're gonna come back, right? Well, we never went back, right? We're still not back, right? My kids' schools, we're still not back. So, but at that point, and I'm going to tell you the timeline now as I know it, okay? Because back then we weren't really clear. So right around that time, so about a week before this whole lockdown went into place, I remember seeing a little boy in my clinic. And at that point, I didn't have the capacity to check, to test for COVID. I was waiting for Quest to send me swabs. I didn't have face shields. I didn't have, N95 masks. I didn't have anything. And we also didn't know how much about like how important is our face shields, right? So I didn't have any of that. I had them on order, right? I was waiting.
Couldn't get them, right?
No, you couldn't get them, right? You couldn't even get gloves. And
you didn't even have toilet paper, right?
No.
Oh yeah,
that was crazy, right? at that point, I remember seeing this little boy, 4-year-old boy, who had this, intense headache so bad for days on end that they actually went to the ER. So I saw him as a follow-up from the ER, right? And so at that point, we also didn't think of headaches as a COVID symptom. What we were thinking fevers and cough and shortness of breath. Like that was it, right? Now we know there's like 50 gazillion symptoms, right?
Right.
So I remember seeing this little boy in the clinic, and I remember, bending down, no mask, like looking in his ears, checking his mouth, like doing my normal exam, like I would, right? Not thinking anything of it. Thinking, well, maybe it's early allergies. Maybe he's got a little sinus congestion going on, doing our normal things, right? Well, about a week later, I developed this really intense headache, and I never get headaches. And it was probably like a 4 or 5 day headache, enough that I was like, should I check myself for the flu or strep? Because my throat was also a little funny. So and again, I didn't have COVID swabs at that time. And I felt like not good enough that I'm like, maybe I should just cancel office hours, because who knows what this is, right? But I got through it and it was fine. And at that time, Peter also had this weird tummy, like a little upset for a day, a little diarrhea, a little headache. But he did his normal thing that we do. We super dosed ourselves with vitamin D, this Chinese herb called windbreaker, V-Clear, elderberry. And we did our normal things, and he was done in like a day, right? And then about 5 days later, my daughter got sick with fever, cough, shortness of breath. I mean, the classic, what we would think of as COVID signs. And her fever lasted for about a week. Her oxygen saturations, I was checking, started going down. Maybe it's like 94, 95%. And I tested her for COVID. It was negative, right? Tested her in the middle of her illness. It was negative. Tested her on day 7 of her fever, and that one came back positive, right? So this whole time I'm thinking, it's not COVID. It's a flu-like thing, right?
Which is to this day still a problem.
To this day, right?
You can test negative and then wait a few days and then you can test positive.
Absolutely. And so then we're thinking, okay, maybe Bodhi, because he's young, maybe he's okay, right? But then he developed a fever, but really low grade, like 98, but 99.1, right? His main thing, really severe abdominal pain and hallucinations. He started hearing voices, saying really mean things. He started seeing shadows and people in his room, really bad headache. I mean, just the most bizarre symptoms, right? And at that point, that was like, this doesn't sound like COVID, right? And he had developed pink eyes for about a day. He got this weird hive-like rash on one side of his face, right? All of the things that we know now could be consistent. And his oxygen levels drop. I mean, low enough that I actually took him to the ER, and he was hospitalized.
So let me jump to Tom, because you got it early on too, and then I want to start asking you guys a bunch of questions.
Yeah. So, but let me just finish really quickly. So for him, I think now in retrospect, he was developing signs of what's now called MIS-C, multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, because he tested swab COVID negative multiple times, right? But in the timeline, it must have been COVID. So I think he probably had a mild, maybe even asymptomatic case of COVID, because now we know that the younger you are, who's only 8 at the time, the more likely you are to be asymptomatic. So I think that he probably had COVID before, and then usually MIS-C develops 2 to 4 weeks later. Super rare, and I was giving him, tons of different supplements, and I really truly think that's what stopped him from going to full blown, that weird Kawasaki-like thing, because that little boy I was telling you about in the beginning, he actually was hospitalized for Kawasaki about a month later. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this whole thing, right? And luckily we went through it and came out of it. So I can now be here with you and educate people.
So he had COVID, but you think it turned into something else?
It turned into this really rare complication, really rare, right? Okay. That's being now recognized in children. But now we all 4 have antibodies. Now in retrospect, we know that all 4 of us had COVID. And so it's just
did you test for antibodies?
We did back in a couple of months ago.
And before I get to you, Tom, can we just cover what that means exactly? Does that mean you can't get it?
We don't, I mean,
I want to know.
we don't know. I mean, now in the beginning, they were, when researchers were just looking at what are called IgG antibodies and like your B cell antibodies, your short-term B cell antibodies, they were finding that some people after 3-4 months, your antibodies disappears. So then there was all this fear. Are you not immune after 3-4 months? When we go into the winter surge, are you going to get it again? Are you at risk? And so now we know that there's longer B cells, longer B cell memory cells and T cells. And so the thought now is perhaps you may be immune at least for probably 9 months to a year, but maybe even lifelong, right? There is some evidence now that's coming out, which would be so great, right? I mean, how awesome would that be if you get it, you recover.
And not get it again.
Yes.
Please, right. God, please.
Yes. Yes.
Well, it's interesting, Tricia, because we don't know a lot about all of this. And that's the thing, 4 or 5 years, we're going to have so much more information. It'll be like looking back at the original SARS. But I'll tell you what, Jill and I got this in early February. So my wife and I don't remember being this sick in my entire life, and like the headache and the body pain. And I mean, I had a fever like I was a little kid. I mean, I was like I was like 104 and change. Wow. And we happened to be traveling. So we had traveled with all you guys in January and on our about a week and a half
we
after.
We didn't know about COVID then, right?
Yeah, no idea. We had no idea, right?
We were in Hawaii, right? It was amazing.
So we get back and like Jill and I travel and we're going out to a conference, a week and a half later to another conference. We're in LA of all places. And it was like we were there for a day and a half and I'm about to go to Arizona and I'm like, I felt like everything hurt. My face got all congested. Breathing was okay, but it was a little off. And like Tricia, as we've said, like I'm a cyclist, an athlete, an avid skier. Like, I mean, for me to be short of breath at all is like a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like the fever and the pain was what blew my mind. And so it was one of these things where I got off the plane in Arizona and went right to my friend's office and I got all the high dose vitamin C and the O's and all, but I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew I was traveling and I had another conference. Yeah. And so for the next like 36 hours, I couldn't move off of the, out of the hotel room. And I go to this conference. I was talking because I was at Michael Burnoff's and he the other day he said to me, do you remember when you're sitting in the corner at my workshop and like you were like you were holding up the wall? And like I needed like everybody there to help me get through it, and that's usually my role. And so it was really humbling. Yeah. And as I look at it, it's like I have a congenital immune deficiency. Oh. Which now that we know more about COVID, I probably would have been more scared about it if I knew what was really going on. Yeah. But, within a week, I was doing pretty well after all that really intensive therapy. And I do a lot of the high dose vitamin D and the glutathiones and other things when I travel anyway. So a lot of the supplements and the nutritional approaches that we take to help minimize our risk of a severe outcome with COVID are the ones that I just do anyway. Yeah. And so I feel really good. But what was really interesting.
For prevention. Right.
And what's really interesting is a lot of what we do to heal from things like Lyme disease or pandas and PANS are just healthy lifestyle things. And, I think about our friend Terry Walls. Everybody's like, do you really eat that way? I'm like, well, yeah, actually you do. And when you, and you're more resilient. And in my backstory, my father had extremely low immunoglobulin levels and mine are low, but they're like more than double what his were. And when I was younger, they were really, really low. So I can only attribute it to the dietary and lifestyle modifications that really did it. But what was crazy with the COVID stuff is it took me almost 3 full weeks to feel better.
Yeah.
And like, this is like what Elisa and I and you do for a living, right? Yep. And I was at tip top shape getting ready for a ski trip, and I was like, this is like my big one for the year. And so I was at my prime and it really kind of kicked my butt. It was really amazing.
Oh, yeah.
How all that happened.
Well, and this is where, Tom, I mean, you bring up such an important point because, now we do know so much more about COVID-19 and on a certain level, maybe we have a little more concern with it, but at the same time, we can feel a little bit better. As we said, that most people are doing better now, right? I mean, the survival rate is significantly better. The problem is, though, when people start equating it with, well, it's just like the flu. Why are we worried about it at all? Well, they're very, very different. I mean, with influenza, first of all, children seem to be the major reservoir of influenza transmitters, right? It does not seem to be the case with COVID-19, right? I mean, in fact, children they're not at zero risk for transmitting it, but at lower risk. But, we know that the vast majority of people, if you have influenza, within 2 weeks, you're going to be fully recovered back to your normal state of health, right? The vast majority of people with COVID are not back at 2 weeks. And what I really worry about is, the potential for what are called long haul symptoms. I mean, that's now, as I work with families and with kids who have COVID, the main thing for me is, okay, let's get you over this illness, but let's also prevent you from having, right, the neurologic problems, the heart problems, the blood clotting problems, the cognitive problems, all the things that, I mean, we don't want to come out of this with more chronic disease, right? And so, I mean, right now, it just dawned on me, like, I don't even know. I never got my son checked, afterwards for fall, but I am actually taking him next Friday to the cardiologist, right? I'm like, might as well check, right? Might as well.
And what do you check? What do you check? Like, what are you scared about? Like, tell me what would be of concern.
So they're finding that for some kids and adults are having residual lung or heart problems, right? Again, this is not to scare anybody, right?
Sure.
But if we can
awareness is key.
Yeah, awareness is key. And especially because my son was hospitalized, right? I just want to know, okay, does he have any problems with his heart function?
Right.
Do we need to be more cautious? I mean, the American Academy of Pediatrics has some guidelines on student athletes who get COVID returning to sports, just to be aware, right? So that they don't have problems.
It's interesting too, Elisa, as you mentioned that earlier with what your son had, because our daughter was like completely fine. And she had been with us and, and she's at the time 10. So it's kind of interesting, but the brain inflammation reminds me, and just this whole story, and I want to find silver linings. And one is, I think the awareness has to be there. And also, so that we don't miss the things you were just talking about. But when you look at long haul type of symptoms, the severe fatigue, the memory loss, the kind of that brain fog thing, and then the heart issues and the cognitive stuff and the inflammation pieces, it sounds a lot like chronic Lyme disease and a lot like pandas and pans in the sense that we have people who get an infection and then a little bit later on, they present with nondescript sort of symptoms that fall under, like myalgic encephalitis or chronic fatigue. And so what we're finding is that there's a whole range of things that can cause similar symptoms. And then of that group, COVID seems to have its own special area where it also likes to do a lot of those sort of vasculitis type things. But I just hope that we kind of treat this really seriously and we look at these longer haul symptoms and try to prevent them. And we also use it to inform what we do in other illnesses, because I've not heard anyone go, oh, the COVID people with long haul are nuts. It's all in their head. But we talk about that with this sort of Lyme group all the time. And I think what we have to understand is that when our bodies are challenged in such a way, they may not react we're getting challenged with more and more significant bacteria and viruses. And we have to look at how our bodies are now uniquely responding to these unique challenges. And I hope that we just bring more compassion as well as awareness to the way these symptoms are being manifest in people so that we can actually get them the care they need.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about just creating the best possible environment in our bodies, because I don't think we can hear this enough. I mean, you were talking, Tom knows my guy is a cyclist, right? Like a hardcore cyclist where the first 5 days that he had COVID, he was out, like hitting it hard.
Crushing
on the
it.
bike.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then he figured out, and then I told me he had COVID because I got tested. I'm like, dude, you better settle down. Yeah. So, and now he's been flat on his back for 7 days. But
and this is an interesting point, Tricia, just as a quickie, is there's people who are going to be like, I'm invincible because this is just how I live my life. And I sometimes border on that. That's the way I'm kind of ingrained in my mind. And you can actually burn yourself out, and you look at the early talk about ACE2 receptors and everything. And regular cardiovascular exercise can bump those levels up and stuff, but you can also crush yourself if you overdo it. So we really have to find a balance here. And one of the first things I told people was you need to chill out a little bit.
Yes.
Well, and also I think
and recovery.
And, to your point too, Tom and Tricia, I mean, I think that it's so, great that we're all here talking about our experiences with having had COVID, because people might look at us and say, well, wow, you guys are so healthy. You shouldn't get COVID. You should be invincible, right? And that was the big fallacy, and still on some levels, a big fallacy that's being what's the right word to say? Promoted by a lot of health and wellness experts, right? We're all to a certain extent vulnerable. We can be less vulnerable. We can become more resilient. So we bounce back like Tom and like you're going to do, and, like me and Bodhi, even though, he was, he got hospitalized, right? We can bounce back and have no residual problems. But there's a stigma now that if you get COVID, oh, it must be because of your lifestyle. It must be because you're eating all those donuts and like, smoking cigarettes or because, because X, Y, and Z. It's like, oh my gosh, right? Maybe that contributes, but for some people and for many people who are living healthy lifestyles and who follow us, right? They're doing everything they can, right? And so you still might get COVID.
Yeah,
and it's not your fault, right?
Totally, absolutely.
So,
no, it's true. But I will say, I have no idea why I have had an easier time of it than he has, and it might be because he stresses his body so much. I've never been accused of exercising too much in my life, but
it's a great point, Tricia, because I mentioned to you the other day, if you look at people who are, and this is not just for cyclists, but I think it's a great segue. People who are Grand Tour cyclists who ride thousands and thousands and thousands of miles a year, either amateurly or professionally, their immune systems are well known. They get done, like professionals that get done a 21-day race, like more than half of them have something like a pneumonia or another illness. Like they beat the crap out of their body. So just because we're doing healthy activities, if we don't do it in a balanced way, we can have a real challenge. And I think to Elisa's point, what's really interesting is we need to understand that doctors are not gods. And if you do all these things right, it is more about resilience than just total, putting up a brick wall and being in a bubble. And our bodies are supposed to be challenged with these things. And we're supposed to, if you look at like the way your immune system works and the cell danger response and all these other things we could talk about, it boils down to, I love this thing called hormesis. And it's basically you get a small challenge and you adapt and then you recover. And a small challenge, you adapt and you recover. But if the challenge is too great or our body is in too poor of a condition, then we get into what we call toxicity. So it's not that any of this is incorrect or wrong. This is just the normal part of living, and we can optimize our chances. But everybody who's safe could go out and have an accident in a car. And statistically speaking, if you're below 50, your chances of dying in a car accident are greater than than of COVID. So we should all kind of drive safer and eat more vegetables and sleep more.
Right.
But the point about Richard is some of it is we have to find more of a parasympathetic de-stress balance. And I think one of the reasons that COVID hits us so much now is we're in a really stress high time. There's a lot of negativity, and we are eating more donuts than we probably should.
Well, I would say to the point about him, he did quit sugar. On the last quit sugar challenge I did, he'd heard me do a couple of them. He's sitting in the back and he's feeling terribly guilty because he's a total sugar addict. So he actually quit sugar in September. So I'm feeling so glad that he did, because that probably helped. But he's still a total carb addict, which I realize is kind of sugar, but it's better than Snickers. Tortilla chips is better than Snickers bars. So he's doing better. But I am trying to make the point to him that were he to eat more vegetables, it might even help more. So that I do feel like it's a spectrum, right? But I want to make the point that the more vegetables, the better. Obviously, the less sugar, the better. Obviously, you guys are in agreement with me. That does help your body be more resilient.
So 100%. And also to Tom's point, there's was a recent article. It was just kind of a thinking article on Medium on, could the vagus nerve protect us from COVID-19, right? Getting to that rest and digest and healing state, the state that we get into when we meditate, when we do diaphragmatic breathing, we can stimulate our vagus nerve through our ears. There's lots of different ways we can do that. We stimulate our vagus nerve by hugging, which right now we're not getting enough hugs, right?
Right.
But Tricia, for you, for you, mindset, right? In Heal Your Hunger, mindset, meditation, mindfulness, that's a part of your being, right? I mean, you do this every single day. And I fully believe it's not that you can will yourself out of something necessarily, but when Bodhi, it was so clear when he was anxious in the hospital and I was anxious, his oxygen levels plummeted. And then when we could stop, do our breathing, do our meditations, do our visualizations, his oxygen levels went right back up. And there was no change
that's so
except his mind, right? So I think it's very powerful. It's free, right? It's something, but it is a muscle we have to develop. Just like your biking muscles, you can't develop your mindfulness and meditation muscles unless you practice it. And that's what you are so good at, Tricia. So I don't know, maybe that is one of the differences too.
I also think that there's this huge part we talk about the placebo effect in medicine, and the mind is so powerful in any of our medical outcomes that we have to actually do what we call control for it. We know that a large majority, maybe not a majority, but at least about a third of medical outcomes, including surgery, are related to this placebo effect, a non-medicine, non-surgical effect that's attributed to your mind. And that's not a bad thing. It's all in your head. That's an amazing thing. Because now you can take control of it.
Exactly.
But you can also have a negative placebo or a positive placebo. And I think that three of us, we all choose to stack the odds in the favor of positive. And I find that once you stack it in the positive, you actually get more than 33%. But what's really interesting is with what Elisa was saying about the calming down, we know that there are three things that came out in the beginning, sort of the first few months of COVID that can help block some of the inflammation that COVID causes. And one of those is nitric oxide. And nitric oxide you can get from your beets and stuff, which a lot of the cyclists like to chow down on beets or their beet juices and stuff to bump it up. But slowing your breathing down, especially like the way you would as you would get into deeper meditation, allowing carbon dioxide levels to come up, will end up causing more nitric oxide to be created in your sinuses in your face. And actually, so you get vasodilation, you feel relaxed, your fingers and toes get warmer, but also you're going to help that nitric oxide will block one of these inflammatory pathways COVID does. Now, the other thing is if you do this around bedtime, it will help you actually get to sleep better. And as we're sleeping and it's dark in our room because we've turned the TV off and there's screens, our melatonin comes out. And melatonin is also another one of these things that blocks it. And so all these little tricks that we can do to help ourselves relax and get to sleep can actually help block some of this inflammation that COVID could trigger. And, and then the other one is ascorbic acid can do it. So a lot of our vitamin C and stuff. So I have people not only eating the vegetables and maybe doing a little more vitamin D and melatonin than they did before, but I'm like, get up in the morning and get some fresh air. Because if you look at the Spanish flu pandemic from 1918, osteopathic physicians said, move. And if you can't move, have your family help move you by shaking your body and get fresh air. And their mortality rates were something like a fifth of everyone else just by doing movement and getting fresh air. And so I'm like, get up in the morning, get fresh air and get a little bit of sunshine. Or if you don't get a lot of sun, get one of the natural lights or like a retimer, the goggles you wear with the cool blue, green lights to bump up your signal to your body in the morning to create melatonin, make it dark earlier in the evening so you release your melatonin. And this is a really great natural way to block inflammation and get yourself to sleep so that your immune system gets to rejuvenate and recover as well.
That is a great hack. I love that. I'm going to, I have some melatonin. I'm going to take it. That's really cool. Now that you mentioned it. Elisa, do you have a couple hacks that we can offer people?
In terms of just promoting immune resilience?
Prevention. Right?
Yeah. I always, I would love if people really went back to food as medicine, because that, again, it's not that food is free, but we need to eat and better to get our nutrients are so much more easily absorbed through our food than through any supplement. I mean, that being said, there are supplements that for sure I'm still giving my kids, and I recommend to my patients and to people who follow me, optimizing vitamin D. Like vitamin D to me in any year, any winter has always been the one vitamin where I'm like, this is the one thing I'm the most religious about in the wintertime.
And
right?
how much should people take as a prevention? How much would you say is okay?
So Tom's laughing because I mean, it's to me and Tom a little bit ridiculous, the controversy around how much vitamin D should you take and what are the optimal blood levels? The range of blood levels. And I recommend that if you can, as a parent and as an adult and as kids, if you can check your levels, even better, because it can be shocking, how low or suboptimal your vitamin D levels are, even in the middle of winter. But Quest Labs or a normal lab here will give the reference range of 20 to 100 nanograms per milliliter, right? It's a really big range, right? So I, for optimal bone health, probably you don't need more than about 20 or 30 nanograms per milliliter, right? On the way low end. But, we know now vitamin D has so many benefits besides just bone health. There's immune health, there's brain health, there's hormone health. I mean, so much, right? And really, if we want to think about all the things we want to help our kids and us as adults with, the anxiety right now, the sleep problems, the autoimmune reactivity that's going on, the attention and focus problems kids are having in school. I mean, vitamin D is going to support all of that. So I would like kids to get to maybe 60 to 80 nanograms per milliliter. And what's fascinating is, I don't know if you guys saw this, but the UK, I mean, this is my mission, right? Vitamin D is like, honestly, right. if I could get vitamin D into the knowledge of vitamin D and actually vitamin D supplements to any kid who needs it, like my life will be complete, right? I mean, not totally, but really the UK is giving free vitamin D supplements to every vulnerable citizen from the months of January through April, 4 months, right?
Wow.
Recognizing, how important it could be.
The rainy months.
Right?
So one of the things that frustrates me here, and I think everybody needs to know, we all know this. There's been papers coming out left and right, and some of the numbers that, and we've known about race disparities and stuff with COVID outcomes and stuff, but they're showing that if we get people's vitamin D up, and really the numbers that I was just reviewing some stuff this morning, they're showing 55. Like, people are talking about actual real decent levels. Like, I agree, 60 to 80, but we can check. And, I went to Harvard a couple days ago, and they agree that vitamin D deficiency is an issue, but then they're like, oh, adults should take 2,000. No, it's not the number on the bottle. It is literally, we have access to blood tests. Get your blood tested.
That's right.
Right?
Because really, if you look at, in general, if you have optimal levels as an adult, you probably still need to take 5,000 IUs per day just to keep your levels optimal, because everything in our lives right now deplete our vitamin D, right? Immune stress, psychological stress, not getting enough sleep, not being outdoors. I mean, we're getting depleted and zapped of our vitamin D left and right. And so it doesn't make sense. I mean, kudos to the UK for doing this, but I couldn't quite get how much they're giving to citizens, but I think they're still only giving like 400 or 1,000 IUs per day, right? So they need more.
And you got to talk about too, there's D2 and there's D3, and D2 is like half essentially. So if your D2 in your milk says 400 per gallon or something, you're really only getting 100, and it's like, so, fortified foods aren't really the way to get this done. And I do think that there's so much out there where we know what levels we want. And there are people who are further behind the 8 ball. And I've had people where they need 10 and 15, 20,000 for a period of time. And, but it should be monitored. And certainly, some people have other fat soluble vitamin deficiencies that prevent their D from getting up. So if you find that you're doing one of these online lab tests, or you're doing it through your primary and you're not getting your levels up, have them look at some of your other levels and work with the practitioner who's skilled. But going back to cycling for a second, a couple summers ago, I rode 6,000 miles.
What?
Which is right. So Richard knows how long this will take. And I put on sunscreen at 6 a.m, and then I cover myself up because it's freezing. And then I pull all the stuff off, which pulls your sunscreen off. And then I get done at 2 p.m. or something. And it's I was out all summer and I was taking 10,000 units and my level was still only in the 80s. I mean, it's really hard to get toxic. It's not that it doesn't happen, and it's not that if you have parathyroid issues or kidney issues, you shouldn't, look at the potential risks. But during this time, something in the range of, 5,000 a day for adults while they're waiting to get their blood test is probably, not going to be an issue. And if you think you may have a medical condition that's pre-existing, ask your doctor for more information about it. But don't be afraid, because we know this is one of the most powerful treatments we have across the board for lifelong health, and specifically in COVID.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love all that.
And I will say, when I was pregnant, before I got pregnant with Bodhi, and, I was planning, if you guys, any woman out there who are thinking of getting pregnant or are pregnant, vitamin D optimization is so important, not just for you, but for your developing baby. I mean, we know that there can be links with reduction in risks of things like asthma and eczema in your baby. So, really, I would encourage you to talk to your OB. And a lot of OBs now are starting to measure vitamin D levels, but asking what the number is, right, to make sure it's optimal. But, after I had Kenzie, and, I nursed her for, I think, like 13 months. And then I was done nursing. I thought, well, maybe we'll try to get ready for baby number 2, who is now Bodhi, right? And I was taking vitamin D supplements the entire time. And I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to check levels because I want to go into pregnancy optimal. My level was 17. Yeah. 17. And I was taking vitamin D. I was taking like 5,000 IUs a day, right? But I just think, first of all, nursing and pregnancy, I mean, they're like little parasites, literally, like leaching everything from you, right? So, I mean, you're just like, I'm sure I was so depleted from that. And then, not getting enough sleep and being back at work full time, whatever it is, right? But that's where checking too, because even if you're taking vitamin D supplements, as Tom said, it is virtually impossible to get to toxic. I mean, in adults, they found maybe like if you took 60,000 IUs a day for like a couple months, and maybe, right? But again, better to check, right, and see. And it's so easy to check now.
So I'm very clear on vitamin D. Can we talk about some of the other ones like glutathione?
Getting back to food as medicine, the nutrients that I think are the most important, right? Let's just to list them off: vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, glutathione, quercetin, right? Those are probably the top 5, I would say, if I'm going to try to focus on which foods I can get them from, right?
I feel like we have the same brain or something here, Elise. So that's totally my top 5 list too.
I love it. That's awesome.
Great. And zinc is really closely tied with animal protein intake. But if you're a vegetarian, shellfish is really high in zinc. But I would focus on like pumpkin seeds and legumes. I mean, pumpkin seeds, I actually have one nutritionist, email me. I mean, I don't know, like just say, hey, I don't think that's right, because you really need animal sources, which is really not true. I've had kids go way up just by grinding pumpkin seeds, sprinkling on salads and soups and oatmeal. Okay. So, I mean, make pumpkin seeds a regular part of your diet is what I would recommend.
Great. Right? Yeah, I love that.
You mentioned glutathione. Think of all of those amazing, like sulfur-rich vegetables, right? The ones that smell like rotten eggs, but are so yummy, like cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale. Mushrooms actually are another really good source of glutathione. Well, sulfur for glutathione, and Epsom salt baths. So that's not food. You're not going to eat those, but like soaking in a tub of Epsom salts will help absorb the magnesium and the sulfate, which will enhance your glutathione levels.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too, because I'll use supplemental glutathione, especially if somebody's sick, for a quick boost of antioxidant and bring down inflammation. But like when you rattle off all the veggies that we want to eat, and like again, getting our quercetin from, broccoli and red onions and certain bell peppers and, grapes and apples and maybe even a little wine here and there, red raspberries. These are things, spinach. I mean, these are all just like rainbow of good food. And one of the things that I recommend for people to do, it's like, and I think, is add something to your diet in this time. Don't necessarily try to remove things and shove a salad down your kid's throat. Maybe add some things in that are fun. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm certainly not an anti-bacon person. So if you happen to like
I'm
bacon,
not either.
things like Brussels sprouts and bacon
Oh,
or
yeah.
cauliflower
Now we're
and bacon,
talking.
Yeah,
boom.
for sure.
So what I'm saying is get creative with what you and your family love and add in some of these things we're talking about, because because when I go through the list that I know that Elise has put out, and I go through my list, I'm like, oh my God, these are all my favorite foods.
I
But
know.
I trained myself. I got it around age 27. My health wasn't so great, and I trained myself to like it. My body started to like it as I cleaned myself up. But if you need to do it because you want to start moving your family in a direction of health to help minimize the potential impact of COVID if you were exposed, start adding a few of these things, but don't go insane,
Yeah, I love
don't feel
all
bad
that.
about not eating like 75 pounds of salad a day like Terry does.
No,
Well-
I have to tell you guys, fried Brussels sprouts, I didn't know they existed until I moved
my
to
gosh,
LA.
yeah.
I know
Yep.
every restaurant in LA that
Yep.
has fried Brussels sprouts, and they often have the
Absolutely.
bacon with them. But I always say that fried Brussels sprouts are like God's gift to emotional eaters, because it's like it's almost as good as French fries, and maybe better even, but they're so good for you as well as being
Really
completely
good.
tasty.
I want to give a tip to the moms listening out there.
Yeah.
If your kids are super picky eaters and literally like picking out every tiny shred of possible green, in your food, that often is a sign that your child is zinc deficient or zinc insufficient. And so sometimes just focusing on some of the zinc rich foods, getting some ground pumpkin seeds, or even trying like a little bit of extra supplemental zinc. And it can be amazing how much that can start to open up your kid's palate. So just think about that, right? Because that is one tip off for me when I see a child who's super picky, only eating, 3 or 4 different foods. I always think, oh, could this child benefit from more zinc?
Well, and you can get zinc from like cashews and stuff too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
Which is kind of cool, because I was just thinking, like when we're talking about the non-meat eating group or even our picky kids, my daughter loves cheese, which I'll openly admit we have some cheese, but not like over the top, but she loves cashew cheese. And so there's a lot of interesting ways to just have fun with it, And I don't know, sometimes some of these cashew cheeses, like we have a local place that literally you cannot tell the difference.
Yeah.
They're really good. Yeah.
Oh, so creamy.
Yeah.
In LA, I have at Erewhon, amazing. If anybody's from LA, it's an amazing health food store, but they make the best eggplant lasagna with no pasta. It's all just layers of eggplant with cashew cheese.
Yum.
So good. So, well, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for, always just being your amazing selves. I just love you both so much. And I think this has been super informative for people. And, I'm here to say, don't get COVID. I'm now, I'm now like a total convert, and I'm like, be as ridiculous as you can, be as paranoid and as like masked up as possible. Do not care one bit about what other people think, and don't go with the crowd who's, just saying it's all a bunch of hogwash, because it's not until you've had it that you realize it's for real, and it sucks so bad.
If I can throw out a quickie about the mask, because from the beginning, I've been really irritable about this. Anybody who's talked to me knows that we're like, oh, the mask prevents stuff. I'm like, no, that's not what the science has ever shown. But more recently, I've been really excited to hear having a real discussion that the mask minimizes the amount that could potentially be transmitted. So if 2 people are doing it, you can now by wearing your mask, increase your risk of a lower severity illness. And maybe, again, we don't know, but going back to the beginning with immunity, you could actually potentially get yourself exposed, have a very mild disease, and lead to having an immunity later on, or at least, an immune memory to it. So it wouldn't be as bad if you get re-exposed. But, I would love for people to just also share a little bit of love with their neighbor here, because there's a lot of people who are afraid.
Yeah.
And we don't know all the answers. We're working in a direction that we think is it, but it's become so polarized. And this is actually one of the pieces of inflammation that comes out of COVID that you're getting, whether you've had COVID or not. And if we can sort of bring the love together and we can start to say, hey, look, I'm wearing this. I would like you to do this too. What you do when you're not around me, maybe I don't need to beat you over the head about, but I'm going to share this medical information about, maybe send them to the podcast or whatever. But let's come together, because where our heart is and where we're vibrating has a lot to do with how bad it's going to be. And again, it's not going to prevent everything, but a lot of people are afraid in this, and let's change that fear to kind of, a healthy outlook, because we have information and we're caring about each other.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
let's stop judging. That's really important.
And
judging
I think
can't be good for your health.
Yeah, and also I think if you're a parent listening, it's so important to understand that our children's experience of trauma or whatever experience they're having is really informed by how we're experiencing the situation. And for instance, when it comes to masks, I have so many parents who are really anxious about, oh my gosh, how is my kid gonna, the socio-emotional trauma of wearing a mask at school and being masked all day, and it's gonna be awful for them. They're gonna be so anxious. Honestly, I have not had a single kid who's minded that. Right? Kids, once they're in school, they're like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, yeah, maybe I would rather not wear this mask. I would rather not have COVID around, right? But, I'm fine. I get to hang out with my friends and I get to play with them. And so it's really our anxiety that we bring to this. Yeah. And so the more that we can acknowledge, okay, this is kind of a sucky year on some levels, but let's look and see, well, what do we actually get to do because of this now, right? Maybe we get to spend more time planning family dinners. Maybe we get to go on family hikes. Maybe we get to see our friends at school when we were at home before, right? I mean, always trying to think about, not to brush aside that this has been a really stressful year, but to say, look, let's acknowledge the stress and let's see how we can turn this into a world that we can actually live in and feel good about, right? Yeah. That we can have some gratitude for, because gratitude is what's going to carry us through however the rest of this pandemic plays out, so that our bodies and our brains and our immune systems can be healthy, right? We're not going to get through this if we don't maintain that.
What a great life lesson, right? Yeah. Teach your kids that in this, one of the biggest stressors of our entire, at least of my life, I can imagine, that we can deal with the stress appropriately and then plan for this amazing future. And we can have all these wonderful things come from it. So again, we have great influence over our kids and all those around us. So
yeah, I love that. And I'm a big believer in the power of prayer. And if we don't have COVID, we can pray for those who do, and pray that they make it through it,
Absolutely.
And they come out stronger on the other end, because it's a horrifying experience, I'm sure, for those who are, it's literally their life is in the balance with it. So let's put all that good energy out there for everybody, and let's hope we all come through this and we can live in more freedom very, very soon.
Yes,
yeah.
For sure.
So, okay. Love you guys. Thanks so much.
Love you so much.
Love you guys.
Thanks
so much.
Everybody for tuning in. It's been great to have you, and join us next time.
Honored to spend Sunday with you guys.
Thanks so much. And join us for another episode of the Heal Your Hunger Show soon.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to get free support, insider health info, exclusive invites to events, and more, visit healyourhunger.com.